The air outside felt impossibly sharp, not cold exactly, just real. It bit at my lungs in a way the recycled, perfumed air inside the compound never did. My bare feet, calloused from years of walking on rough concrete and packed earth, scraped against unfamiliar gravel. Every single nerve ending screamed with a primal fear, a terror that felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I did not look back. I could not. One glance, one moment of hesitation, and I knew I would be pulled right back into the suffocating embrace of what they called their family. What I now understood was a cage. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a drumbeat of freedom and panic all at once. The moon, a sliver barely visible through the thick canopy of trees, offered scant comfort, but it was enough. It was a guide. It was a promise. I ran. The darkness was a friend and an enemy. It hid me from any searching eyes, but it also obscured the path, making every step a gamble. Twigs snapped underfoot, each sound echoing like a gunshot in the profound silence of the forest. My breath hitched, ragged and shallow. I focused on the pain in my chest, the burning in my legs. These sensations were real. They were mine. They were not dictated by him, by the leader, by the pervasive, insidious control that had seeped into every corner of my existence for more years than I cared to count. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs threatened to give out. My mind, still reeling from the sudden, jarring shift from absolute control to absolute freedom, struggled to process. One minute I was reciting the daily affirmations, the next I was scrambling over a poorly maintained fence, adrenaline my only companion. I had planned this for months, meticulously, secretly, every stolen moment of thought, a dangerous act of rebellion. The fear of discovery had been a constant companion, a cold knot in my stomach. Now, that knot had unwound, replaced by a wild, untamed terror of the unknown. But beneath it, a tiny, flickering ember of hope began to glow. Eventually, the forest thinned. I stumbled onto a narrow, unpaved road, barely more than a dirt track. The world outside the compound was a blur of forgotten details, a place I had once inhabited, but now felt alien. I walked, then jogged, then walked again, the sole focus being distance. Just keep moving. Just get away. The first sign of civilization was a distant, blinking red light atop a radio tower. It was a beacon, a signal that there was indeed a world beyond the trees, beyond the lies. Hours later, the first faint hint of dawn painted the sky in muted grays and purples. I was still walking, my body aching, my mind a jumble of exhaustion and exhilaration. A distant hum grew louder, resolving into the unmistakable sound of an approaching vehicle. Panic flared anew. Was it them? Had they found me? I dove into a ditch, pulling dead leaves and branches over myself, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the damp earth. The truck rumbled past, its headlights cutting through the pre-dawn gloom. A mundane delivery van, not a search party. The wave of relief was so profound, it almost brought me to my knees. I emerged from the ditch, covered in mud and leaves, looking like some wild creature. The sun was now a weak orange glow on the horizon, revealing a small gas station and a diner. Civilization. Real civilization. The smell of coffee and frying bacon wafted through the air, a scent so normal, so utterly ordinary, that it felt like a shock to my system. My stomach, empty for what felt like days, growled in protest. Hesitantly, I approached the diner. My reflection in the grimy window showed a gaunt, wide-eyed stranger. My hair was matted, my clothes torn. I looked exactly what I was, a refugee from a forgotten war. Inside, a few truckers sat hunched over their meals, their voices a low murmur. It was overwhelming. The sheer normalcy of it all. I almost turned away, almost retreated back to the familiar solitude of the forest. But the smell of coffee was too strong, the promise of warmth too inviting. A kind-faced waitress, her uniform a little too tight, noticed me hovering at the door. She did not flinch, did not openly stare. She just offered a small, tired smile. "Come on in, Han. What can I get for you?" Her voice was soft, devoid of judgment. It was the first truly gentle voice I had heard in years that was not laced with ulterior motives, not designed to manipulate. I managed to croak out a request for water. She brought me a large glass, no questions asked. The simple act of human kindness was almost too much. I felt a tremor start in my hands, then spread through my whole body. It was not fear. It was something else. A thawing. I spent the next few days in a haze. A local shelter took me in, no questions asked, just quiet understanding. They had seen others like me, they told me. Escapees. Survivors. The term cult was never explicitly used, but it hung in the air, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken truth. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to piece together my story for them, for myself. The words came out in fragments, disjointed memories, like shards of a broken mirror. The initial allure, the promise of belonging, of purpose, of a family that would never abandon me. That was the hook. I had been young, vulnerable, searching for something to fill a void, left by a chaotic childhood. He, the leader, had appeared like a savior, charismatic, brilliant, offering simple answers to complex problems. His name was Elijah Thorne, or so he called himself. He had a way with words, was uncertain, fraught with danger, but for the first time in a very long time, I felt a flicker of hope. A sense that justice, however elusive, might finally be within our grasp. We were ready for the fight. The discovery of the tape was a seismic event, a tremor that shook the foundations of our meticulously constructed legal strategy and, more profoundly, the fragile peace we had begun to cultivate within ourselves. The silence that followed its final, chilling moments in the conference room was heavier than any sound, a vacuum filled with the echoes of Alpha's insidious voice. Eleanor, our lead attorney, was the first to stir, her usually impassive face etched with a grim satisfaction that warred with a visible revulsion. "This changes everything," she had articulated, her gaze fixed on the small, unassuming device as if it held the key to an ancient, malevolent secret. Her words were not a question but a profound declaration, a recognition of the immense shift in our battleground. We now held a weapon, undeniable and devastating. The days that followed blurred into a relentless cycle of strategy sessions, late-night calls, and the meticulous parsing of legal precedents. The tape became the nucleus of our entire operation. Its authenticity was beyond doubt, its chain of custody impeccable. The legal team, invigorated by this breakthrough, worked with a tireless intensity. They saw not just a case, but an opportunity for true reckoning, a chance to dismantle a system of abuse that had thrived in the shadows for far too long. Discussions revolved around its strategic deployment, when to reveal it, how to frame it for maximum impact, how to insulate it from Alpha's inevitable attempts to discredit it. We knew he would try. He always did. We braced ourselves for Alpha's counterattack. A man of his ego and power would not simply retreat. The news of the tape's existence, even if not yet public, would undoubtedly filter through his intricate web of informants and loyalists. We anticipated a multi-pronged assault, legal maneuvers to quash the evidence, a vicious smear campaign orchestrated through his media connections, and most disturbingly, direct intimidation. Our legal team had already begun to fortify our defenses, preparing for the inevitable onslaught. They advised us to limit our public appearances, to be vigilant about our surroundings, and to trust no one outside our immediate circle. The world had suddenly become a far more dangerous place. For me, the tape was a potent elixir of validation and renewed trauma. It was proof, irrefutable and horrifying, that every whispered doubt, every gut-wrenching memory, every moment of self-blame had been rooted in a monstrous reality. It confirmed the systematic nature of his abuse, the calculated cruelty that had masqueraded as spiritual enlightenment. Yet, hearing his voice again, the familiar cadences laced with such cold malevolence dragged me back to the darkest corners of my past. Sleep became an even more elusive prize. The nightmares, already a constant companion, intensified, now haunted by the precise, chilling inflections of his recorded words. I would wake in a cold sweat, the phantom weight of his presence suffocating me, only to find Sarah's hand reaching for mine in the darkness. Our shared trauma, a heavy, suffocating cloak, was also our most profound connection, a silent language of understanding that transcended words. We would sit together, sometimes for hours, simply holding hands, our eyes meeting across the conference table, in silent acknowledgement of the horrors being discussed, finding solace in the simple fact of not being alone. The legal team, recognizing the tape's potential beyond just our case, decided it could be a powerful catalyst for other survivors. Many were still deeply ensnared in Alpha's psychological grip, paralyzed by fear or the lingering effects of his manipulation. We began to craft a sensitive outreach strategy, a delicate dance of offering hope without re-traumatizing. It was not about sensationalism, but about quietly extending a hand, providing a safe harbor for those who might finally be ready to break free. We established a secure, anonymous channel for communication, emphasizing confidentiality and support. The responses were slow at first, hesitant emails trickling in, anonymous calls that often ended in terrified silence. But then, gradually, the trickle became a stream. Each new voice, each new story, added immeasurable weight to our cause, building a collective narrative of abuse that was impossible to ignore. But with each new survivor came a renewed sense of responsibility, a heavier burden to bear. We were not just fighting for ourselves anymore. We were fighting for them, for their healing, for their justice. Our legal counsel advised against immediate public disclosure of the tape. Its impact, they reasoned, would be far greater if introduced strategically, at the apex of our legal assault. However, they began meticulously preparing a comprehensive media strategy for when that moment arrived. They understood that public opinion could be a powerful ally or a formidable foe, and we needed to control the narrative, to present the truth clearly and unequivocally, before Alpha could twist it with his usual propagandist flair. We conducted mock interviews, rehearsed our statements, and prepared for the inevitable onslaught of media attention that would accompany such a high-profile case. It was another layer of performance, another mask to wear. But this one, at least, was in service of the truth. With the stakes escalating dramatically, security became a paramount concern. The legal team, recognizing the very real danger Alpha posed, arranged for enhanced protection for key witnesses and for us. It felt surreal, living under a constant shadow of potential danger, having to be aware of our surroundings, to check our rearview mirrors, to vary our routines. This new reality underscored the gravity of our undertaking. Alpha was not just a charlatan, he was a dangerous man, and we were directly challenging the very core of his power, his carefully constructed empire of deceit. Every creak of a floorboard, every unexpected shadow, sent a jolt of fear through me, a constant reminder that we were playing a high-stakes game with a ruthless opponent. The first tangible legal volley came in the form of a meticulously prepared civil complaint. It was a document of over 100 pages, detailing years of psychological, emotional, and financial abuse, meticulously backed by our growing dossier of evidence. The tape, for now, remained a closely guarded secret, a trump card waiting for the opportune moment. The filing of the complaint was a public declaration of war, a gauntlet thrown directly at Alpha's feet. The media, already sniffing around the edges of Alpha's Golden Path organization, picked up on the story immediately. The initial reports were cautious, referring to allegations and claims, but the seed had been planted. Alpha's response was swift and predictable. His legal team, a formidable array of high-powered attorneys, immediately filed motions to dismiss, alleging defamation, lack of standing, and a litany of other procedural roadblocks. Simultaneously, his PR machine roared to life. Alpha himself released a statement, a masterclass in victimhood and spiritual superiority. He painted himself as a benevolent spiritual leader, being unjustly attacked by disgruntled former followers, driven by jealousy and a desire for financial gain. He spoke of the sacred trust he held, of the purity of his teachings, and lamented the cynical attempts to undermine his divine mission. His loyal followers, still deeply entangled in his web, rallied around him, flooding social media with messages of support, condemning us as liars and traitors. It was a familiar pattern, one we had anticipated, but it still stung, a fresh wound on old scars. The public discourse became a battlefield. We watched, helpless, as Alpha's narrative took hold in certain circles, amplified by those who blindly believed in him or who were simply swayed by his charismatic performance. It was a stark reminder of the power of manipulation, how easily truth could be distorted, how readily people would cling to comforting lies over uncomfortable truths. Our legal team advised us to stay silent publicly for the time being, to let the legal process unfold, and to avoid engaging in a mudslinging contest we couldn't win on Alpha's terms. It was agonizing to hear his lies repeated, to see his followers defend him, to feel the weight of public skepticism, and yet remain silent. But we trusted Eleanor's judgment, her strategic brilliance. The process of gathering depositions began. These were grueling, emotionally draining sessions where we and other early survivors who had bravely joined our coalition were forced to recount our experiences under oath, facing Alpha's attorneys. They were relentless, probing, attempting to trip us up, to find inconsistencies, to cast doubt on our credibility. Each question felt like an invasion, each answer a reopening of old wounds. I remember one particular session, lasting over 8 hours, where Alpha's attorney, a stern, unyielding woman with piercing eyes, grilled me on every detail of my time in the Golden Path. She questioned my motivations, my mental state, even my memory, implying that my trauma had warped my perception. It was a brutal psychological assault, designed to wear me down, to make me doubt myself. But I held firm, my voice steady, my resolve unwavering. I had prepared for this, mentally rehearsing the answers, drawing strength from the knowledge that I was speaking for so many others. Sarah, who had gone through her deposition a week earlier, had warned me about the intensity, the feeling of being flayed open. Her support, a quiet text message before I entered the room, had been a lifeline. As more survivors came forward, the sheer volume of evidence began to overwhelm Alpha's legal team. We had meticulously documented everything: financial records, internal memos, emails, testimonies. Each new piece of the puzzle painted a clearer, more damning picture of systemic abuse and fraud. The coalition grew, a diverse group of individuals from different backgrounds, united by their shared experience and their unwavering commitment to justice. There were former high-ranking members who had witnessed Alpha's true nature firsthand, artists and professionals who had poured their life savings into the Golden Path, and young, vulnerable individuals who'd been lured in by promises of enlightenment. Each story was unique, yet tragically familiar, echoing the same patterns of control, exploitation, and manipulation. The legal team organized support groups for the survivors, recognizing that the legal battle was only one part of the healing process. These meetings, held in a discreet location, became a sanctuary. We shared our fears, our anger, our tentative hopes. It was in these circles that the true power of our coalition became apparent. We were not just a group of plaintiffs. We were a community, rebuilding trust, finding strength in our collective voice. The quiet courage of each individual, their willingness to relive their pain for the sake of others, was a constant source of inspiration. But Alpha was not idle. As the legal pressure mounted, his tactics grew more desperate. We started receiving anonymous threats, vague but menacing messages delivered through burner phones or left on our doorsteps. Our social media accounts were targeted by coordinated cyber attacks, floods of hateful messages, and fabricated stories designed to discredit us. there were reports of private investigators lurking around the homes of key witnesses, attempting to intimidate them. One survivor, a woman named Maria, who had provided particularly damning financial records, found her car tires slashed and a dead animal left on her porch. It was a chilling escalation, a clear signal that Alpha was willing to cross lines, to resort to outright criminality to protect his empire. The legal team immediately brought in security experts and notified law enforcement. While the threats were difficult to directly attribute to Alpha, the timing and nature of them were unmistakable. This new layer of danger, the constant awareness of being watched, tested our resolve. The fear, which had been tempered by hope, now resurfaced with a vengeance, a cold knot in the pit of my stomach. But it also hardened our determination. Maria, despite her terror, refused to back down. Her courage, in the face of such blatant intimidation, became a rallying cry for the entire coalition. We would not be silenced. The media, initially cautious, began to take a deeper interest as the story progressed. Investigative journalists, sensing the magnitude of the unfolding drama, started digging into Alpha's past, unearthing old rumors, former associates who had quietly disappeared, and questionable financial dealings. The narrative began to shift. What was once described as a spiritual organization facing allegations was slowly being exposed as a potentially dangerous cult. The Golden Path's carefully curated image began to fray around the edges. Our legal team, seeing the opportune moment approaching, prepared to introduce the tape. The plan was meticulously crafted, designed to create maximum impact. It would be presented during a crucial preliminary hearing, a moment when the court would be determining whether there was sufficient evidence to proceed with a full trial. The legal team believed the tape would be the undeniable proof, the smoking gun that would transform the civil case into a criminal investigation, as we had hoped. The anticipation was palpable, a mixture of dread and exhilaration. This was it, the moment of truth. The days leading up to the hearing were agonizing. I felt a constant tremor beneath my skin, a nervous energy that made it impossible to sit still. Sarah and I spent hours talking, rehearsing, comforting each other. We knew this would be a pivotal moment, a point of no return. If the tape failed to have the impact we hoped for, if Alpha's legal team managed to discredit it, our entire effort could crumble. The weight of that possibility was immense. Not just for us, but for all the survivors who had placed their trust in us, who had risked everything to come forward. On the morning of the hearing, the courthouse was a hive of activity. Reporters swarmed the entrance, cameras flashed, and Alpha's loyalists, easily identifiable by their uniform white attire, formed a silent, disapproving phalanx. We walked through them, our heads held high, drawing strength from each other's presence. The courtroom itself was packed, every seat taken, the air thick with tension. Alpha was there, seated at his table, surrounded by his legal team. He looked impeccably dressed, his face a mask of serene confidence, his eyes occasionally sweeping over us with a chilling, almost paternalistic pity. It was a performance, perfected over decades, designed to project innocence and spiritual authority. Eleanor began her presentation with a methodical recounting of the evidence, laying out the civil claims with precision and clarity. She detailed the financial exploitation, the psychological manipulation, the emotional abuse, all supported by a mountain of meticulously compiled documents and survivor testimonies. Then, she paused, her gaze sweeping across the courtroom, landing briefly on Alpha, before settling on the judge. "Your Honor," she announced, her voice resonating with authority, "we have one final piece of evidence to present, one that we believe will unequivocally demonstrate the true nature of the defendant's actions and the profound criminality of his enterprise." A hush fell over the courtroom. Alpha's calm demeanor flickered, a subtle tightening around his eyes. Eleanor signaled to a member of her team, who then brought forward a small, unassuming audio player. The technician carefully connected it to the courtroom sound system. The air crackled with anticipation. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my chest. A drumbeat of fear and hope. This was it. The moment we had fought for. The moment that could change everything. The future, still uncertain and fraught with danger, now hung precariously on the playback of a single, chilling recording. We were ready. The fight was about the continuation of something far grander and more terrifying than I had ever fully grasped. The courtroom held its breath. The small audio player, a relic of a bygone era in its simplicity, hummed softly before a crackle of static filled the air. It was a harsh, unwelcome sound, like a tear in the fabric of reality, and it sent a shiver down my spine. Then, a voice. Not Alpha's. Not yet. It was a different voice, muffled, as if speaking through a filter or from a distance. "Is the recording active?" A low, anxious voice asked. A pause. Then, Alpha's voice. Clear, unmistakable, and utterly devoid of the polished charm he usually wore. This was Alpha unmasked, stripped bare of his public persona. "Yes. It is active. And it is secure. Do not waste my time with trivialities. The matter at hand. The new candidates for the next cycle. Have they been vetted according to the revised protocols?" My breath hitched. New candidates. The cycle. It was all there, laid bare in his own words. The system, the one I had fought against, the one that had consumed so many lives, was a deliberate, ongoing process. The other voice, now a little clearer, replied, "Sir, there have been some anomalies. A few of the chosen ones have shown a surprising resilience. Unexpected deviations from predicted psychological profiles. One, in particular, has proven difficult to control." Alpha chuckled, a cold, humorless sound that scraped against my nerves. "Difficult to control? My dear associate, that is precisely the point. We do not seek pliable sheep. We seek the ones who fight, the ones who struggle against the current. Their resistance is the fuel. Their eventual breaking, the ultimate triumph. It is in their desperate attempts to assert their will that we extract the purest essence of their potential. The lessons. The data. The ultimate refinement of the process." A gasp rippled through the public gallery. I saw some jurors exchange horrified glances. Alpha, for his part, remained outwardly composed, his gaze fixed on the judge, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor in his jaw, the only hint of his internal turmoil. The other voice continued, expressing concern about the integrity of the system, the potential for exposure. But Alpha cut him off, his voice hardening, each word a hammer blow. "Exposure? Do you truly believe that the world, in its current state of blissful ignorance and self-imposed blindness, would recognize the truth even if it were screamed from the rooftops? They see what they want to see. They believe what they are told to believe. We merely provide the framework for their predetermined conclusions. This entire societal construct, it is a stage. And we, my friend, are the playwrights, the directors, and the ultimate critics. The candidates, as you so quaintly call them, are merely actors in a grand production designed to teach us, and in time, to teach them the true nature of their existence, their limitations, their subservience to a higher order." The recording continued, a chilling monologue on Alpha's philosophy, his absolute contempt for free will, his belief that humanity was a resource to be managed. Its struggles merely data points in a vast, ongoing experiment. He spoke of manipulating outcomes, orchestrating despair, even engineering moments of false hope, all to observe the nuanced reactions, to perfect the system that governed their choices. He alluded to a network of individuals, powerful and unseen, who shared his vision, working in concert to maintain this elaborate charade. The profound criminality of his enterprise. Eleanor's words echoed in my mind. It wasn't just about money or power in the conventional sense. It was about absolute control, about reshaping reality itself, about proving a dark nihilistic worldview. The other voice, clearly intimidated, eventually confirmed compliance, promising to redouble efforts to manage the, quote, anomalies. The recording ended abruptly with Alpha's final, almost jovial, pronouncement. Excellent. Remember, our work is not merely about control. It is about revelation. The revelation of the true nature of their pathetic, self-deceiving existence. And in that revelation lies our ultimate power. The silence that followed was deafening. The courtroom was a tableau of shock and disbelief. Jurors sat stone-faced, some with tears welling in their eyes, others pale, with barely suppressed fury. The public gallery buzzed with a low, angry murmur that the bailiffs struggled to contain. Alpha's lawyer, a man who had until this point maintained an air of unflappable arrogance, finally found his voice. "Your Honor," he boomed, rising to his feet, his face flushed. This is an outrage. This recording is clearly fabricated, a cheap imitation, a voice recording, utterly inadmissible. It is a desperate, last-ditch attempt to sway this court with sensationalist, unverified material. Eleanor, calm and collected, stood her ground. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and resonant. "We anticipated this objection. This recording was not obtained through illicit means. It was provided to us by a former associate of the defendant, a man who, after years of complicity, grew a conscience and attempted to expose Alpha from within. He paid the ultimate price for his courage, but not before ensuring this evidence reached us through a secure, encrypted channel." She gestured to a large screen that had been set up beside the witness stand. "We have already submitted to the court a comprehensive forensic analysis of the audio file. Our experts have verified its authenticity, confirming that the primary voice is indeed that of the defendant, Alpha. Furthermore, spectral analysis indicates no signs of digital manipulation or fabrication. The secondary voice has also been identified as that of a deceased individual, a known figure within Alpha's inner circle, whose disappearance was previously ruled a tragic accident. We believe this recording was made during a private, secure meeting between Alpha and this individual, a meeting where the defendant felt utterly safe to speak his mind, unburdened by the need for public pretense." Eleanor paused, allowing her words to sink in. "This is not a fabricated piece of sensationalism, Your Honor. This is a confession. A blueprint of Alpha's entire operation, spoken in his own voice, revealing his true motives, his contempt for humanity, and the vast, insidious nature of his enterprise. It unequivocally demonstrates the profound criminality we have sought to expose." The judge, a stern woman who had presided over countless complex cases, leaned forward, her expression grave. She listened intently to Eleanor, then turned her gaze to Alpha's lawyer, who stood fuming, visibly deflated by Eleanor's detailed rebuttal. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, her voice measured but firm, "the court has reviewed the preliminary forensic report submitted by the prosecution. While the defense is, of course, entitled to challenge the authenticity of this evidence, the initial findings do not support your claim of fabrication. Given the gravity of the content and the prosecution's detailed explanation of its provenance, I will allow this recording to be admitted as evidence. The jury will be instructed on how to weigh this evidence, along with all other testimony and exhibits presented." A collective sigh of relief, or perhaps astonishment, swept through our side of the courtroom. I felt a wave of dizzying triumph, quickly followed by a cold dread. Alpha's words, so casually cruel, so utterly dismissive of human life and choice, had painted a picture of a world far more controlled than I had ever imagined. My own experiences, the choices I had been forced to make, the trials I had endured, suddenly made horrifying sense within the framework he had articulated. I was one of the anomalies, one of the fighters whose resistance fueled his twisted experiments. The judge called for a brief recess to allow the jury to compose themselves and for the defense to prepare its response to this sudden, devastating blow. As the courtroom slowly emptied, a strange mix of exhilaration and exhaustion washed over me. We had done it. We had landed the decisive strike, but the victory felt hollowed by the chilling implications of Alpha's confession. Alpha himself remained seated, his face a mask of impenetrable calm. His eyes, however, found mine across the emptying room. There was no anger, no panic, only a deep, unsettling understanding. It was a look that seemed to say, "You may have won this battle, but you still do not comprehend the true nature of the war." A shiver traced its way down my spine. The fight was far from over. Eleanor approached me, her face showing the strain of the moment, yet her eyes shone with fierce satisfaction. "We did it," she murmured, a genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time in what felt like an eternity. "He's finished, at least in here." I nodded, unable to articulate the complex swirl of emotions within me. The relief was immense, a physical weight lifting from my chest. But the fear, the deeper, systemic fear, had only intensified. His words about the network, about the world being a stage, resonated far too strongly. "He spoke of a larger network," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Others. Who are they?" Eleanor's smile faltered. "That," she said, "is the next chapter. We've exposed Alpha. We've broken his immediate power structure. But what he alluded to, the playwrights, the directors, that's a different kind of fight. One we've only just begun to understand." The recess stretched, the air outside the courtroom thick with anticipation. News cameras swarmed, reporters shouting questions into the void. My face, once carefully hidden, was now plastered across every screen, a symbol of the fight against Alpha. It was a strange, disorienting shift. I was no longer just the survivor, the victim, the witness. I was a protagonist in a story that had just exploded onto the global stage. When court resumed, Alpha's lawyer launched into a desperate, rambling attempt to discredit the recording, painting it as a desperate ploy, a deepfake, anything to undermine its impact. But his arguments lacked conviction. His voice wavered, and the jury's faces remained impassive, their expressions hardened by the chilling words they had heard. The damage was done. The truth, in its most brutal form, had been laid bare. The prosecution rested. The defense, after a brief whispered conference with Alpha, announced it would call no further witnesses. They knew it was over. The judge, after ensuring all procedural requirements were met, began her instructions to the jury. Her words were meticulous, outlining the legal framework, the burden of proof, the elements of the crimes Alpha stood accused of. But beneath the legal jargon, the weight of the evidence, particularly the recording, hung heavy in the air. The jury retired to deliberate. The waiting began. It was a different kind of waiting than I had known before. Not the frantic, desperate waiting for survival, but a tense, almost surreal calm. The outcome seemed inevitable, yet the finality of it still felt distant, almost unreal. Hours passed. Each minute stretched into an eternity. I sat with Eleanor, the silence between us punctuated only by the occasional hushed conversation of the legal team. My mind replayed Alpha's words, his cold, calculating assessment of humanity. The image of the playwrights and directors, orchestrating lives, lingered like a shadow. Then, a rustle. A bailiff entered, his face grim. The jury had reached a verdict. A collective intake of breath. Everyone rose as the jury filed back in, their faces unreadable. My heart hammered against my ribs, a primal rhythm of fear and hope. Alpha stood, his posture still impossibly straight, his eyes scanning the jury, then me. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something in his gaze. Not defeat, but a complex mix of resignation and something akin to a challenge. The foreman, a middle-aged woman with kind but resolute eyes, handed the verdict slip to the bailiff, who in turn passed it to the judge. The judge read it silently, her expression unchanging. Then, she looked up, her gaze sweeping across the courtroom, finally settling on Alpha. In the matter of the people versus Alpha, on the charge of conspiracy to commit aggravated assault and battery, and multiple counts of criminal manipulation and exploitation, we find the defendant, Alpha. Her voice paused, a dramatic beat that seemed to echo through the very foundations of the building. Guilty. The word reverberated, shaking the air. A wave of sound erupted from the public gallery, a mix of gasps, cheers, and choked sobs. Alpha's lawyer slumped in his chair. Alpha himself, however, did not flinch. His eyes, fixed on me, held a strange, almost knowing glint. It was as if he had anticipated this outcome, not with dread, but with a certain detached acceptance. The judge continued, her voice cutting through the rising din. On the charge of leading an organized criminal enterprise, we find the defendant, Alpha, guilty. Another roar, louder this time. The bailiffs struggled to maintain order. Eleanor gripped my arm, her relief palpable. Tears welled in my eyes, a mix of exhaustion, vindication, and a profound sense of closure for this particular chapter. But the look in Alpha's eyes, it gnawed at me. It wasn't the look of a defeated man. It was the look of a man who knew something I didn't. A man whose game had merely shifted, not ended. The judge quickly moved to set a sentencing date, then adjourned the court. The gavel struck, a sharp, decisive sound that marked the end of the trial, but not, I realized, the end of the war. As the courtroom emptied, I was enveloped by a surge of people. Eleanor's team, a few friendly faces from the public gallery, even some reporters who managed to slip past the security. Congratulations poured in, handshakes, pats on the back. It was overwhelming, a cacophony of relief and celebration. Eleanor pulled me aside, away from the immediate throng. "We need to talk," she said, her voice low and serious. "Not here? Not now, but soon." What he said in that recording about the network. My sources have been quiet for a while, too quiet. But I think this verdict, this exposure, is going to stir things up. We've cut off one head of a mesmerizing presence that could make you believe anything. Make you feel like you were the most important person in the world, while simultaneously stripping away every ounce of your individuality. He spoke of a higher truth, a unique path to enlightenment that only his chosen few could walk. We were the enlightened. Everyone else was lost, corrupted, beyond saving. That was the core of his message. Us versus them. A powerful, intoxicating delusion. Life within the compound was a carefully constructed reality. Every moment was scheduled. Every thought guided. We worked tirelessly, growing our own food, maintaining the buildings, attending endless hours of lectures and group sessions where we confessed our sins and pledged unwavering loyalty to Elijah. Money, our personal belongings, our past lives, all were surrendered. It was a necessary sacrifice, he would explain, to cleanse us of worldly attachments, to prepare us for the Great Awakening. We were told the outside world was a cesspool of deception and moral decay, that only within the sanctuary of the compound could true purity be found. The manipulation was so subtle at first, so gradual, that you did not even realize it was happening. It was like a slow poison, seeping into your mind, changing your perceptions, eroding your sense of self. Doubts were met with stern guidance, gentle rebukes that made you question your own sanity, your own judgment. If you felt unhappy, it was your own fault, your own spiritual failing. Elijah was perfect. His teachings were flawless. Any suffering was a test, an opportunity for growth. But beneath the veneer of spiritual enlightenment, there was control. Absolute control. Our diets were restricted, our sleep deprived. We were isolated from family and friends, our letters censored, our calls monitored. Relationships within the group were encouraged only if they served the collective, meaning they served Elijah. He was the ultimate authority, the final arbiter of truth. His word was law. His whims were divine directives. The turning point for me was gradual, a slow awakening rather than a sudden revelation. It began with small discrepancies, moments when his words did not align with his actions. He preached humility, yet lived in opulence. He spoke of equality, yet demanded absolute subservience. He claimed to be celibate, yet rumors of his indiscretions with young female followers were whispered in hushed tones, dismissed as slander by the loyalists. But I saw things. I heard things. Little cracks in the perfect facade. Then came the incident with Sarah. She was a young woman, barely out of her teens, who had dared to question one of Elijah's directives during a group meeting. Her voice was trembling, but her question was logical, direct. Elijah did not respond with anger. He responded with a chillingly calm, methodical dismantling of her character, her intelligence, her spiritual worth. He turned the entire group against her, isolating her, shaming her. Within days, Sarah was gone. We were told she had chosen to leave, unable to handle the spiritual hydra. But the body is still very much alive. Her words confirmed my own chilling intuition. The victory felt immense, a monumental achievement against an almost insurmountable foe. Yet it was also a stark revelation of the true scale of the adversary. Alpha was a kingpin, yes, but he had spoken of playwrights, of a system designed to teach them the true nature of their existence. It was a level of manipulation that transcended individual greed or power lust. It was ideological, a fundamental reordering of human experience. I spent the next few days in a blur of interviews, debriefings, and attempts to process the seismic shift in my reality. The media frenzy was intense. My story, once a whisper, was now a shout. The world was reeling from the revelations of Alpha's enterprise, the sheer audacity of his control, the chilling philosophy he espoused. People were angry, afraid, and desperately searching for answers. But I knew the answers they sought were only scratching the surface. Alpha was behind bars, his immediate reign of terror over. But his words in the recording, the casual mention of new candidates, the ongoing cycles, the architects behind the scenes, they haunted my waking hours and infiltrated my dreams. Eleanor arranged a private meeting a few days later, in a secure, undisclosed location. The room was Spartan, functional. A long, polished table dominated the center, flanked by several ergonomic chairs. No windows, just smooth, unadorned walls, and a single heavy door. The air conditioning hummed with a low, constant drone, a sound that usually lulled me, but now only sharpened my senses. Eleanor was already there, seated at one end of the table, a slim folder in front of her. Her usual sharp suit was replaced by something softer, a dark, tailored dress that nonetheless conveyed authority. Her expression was grim, her eyes holding a depth of weariness I had rarely seen. She gestured for me to sit opposite her. There were no pleasantries, no small talk about the weather or the chaos outside. We were beyond that now. The world was still spinning on its axis, but our axis, my axis, had been irrevocably tilted. She began without preamble, her voice low and carefully modulated. Eleanor began without preamble, her voice low and carefully modulated. She said, "We have a problem, a significant one." She pushed the folder across the table, not all the way, just enough for me to see the top sheet. It was a photograph, grainy, satellite imagery perhaps, of a familiar cityscape. My city. But something was wrong. A shimmering, almost invisible distortion hung over a section of downtown, like heat haze but too regular, too defined. I looked at her, then back at the image. "What is that?" I asked, my voice a dry whisper. She sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of the world. "That," she said, "is what we are calling a localized temporal anomaly, or an echo." As some of the more poetic minds in research have termed it, it is not stable. Temporal anomaly. Echo. The words hung in the air, abstract and terrifying. I felt a cold dread begin to coil in my stomach. My mind raced back to the incident, the impossible moments, the flashes of impossible light, the feeling of being stretched thin across time itself. She continued, her gaze unwavering. It is directly linked to the event, your event, and to you. My breath caught in my throat. Linked to me? What does that mean? It means, she explained patiently, that the initial energy discharge, the one you experienced, created a localized distortion. We have seen similar phenomena before, but never with this level of stability, or, rather, this level of controlled instability. It is like a scar on reality, a wound that refuses to heal. I stared at the image, then at her. Controlled instability? That sounds like a contradiction. It is, she agreed, and it is why you are here. We believe you are the key to understanding it and potentially to stabilizing it, or dissolving it. Me? I felt a surge of disbelief, then a flicker of something else, a strange sense of recognition. It was as if a piece of a puzzle I hadn't known existed had just been presented. My memories of the event were fragmented, chaotic, but the feeling lingered, that sensation of being at the very edge of something profound and terrifying. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping even lower. The anomaly is fluctuating. It expands, then contracts. When it expands, it affects the immediate area. People experience time dilation, localized temporal loops, even brief chronological displacements. Nothing catastrophic yet, nothing that has broken through the veil of plausible deniability, but it is escalating. The last expansion was significant. It covered a full city block for nearly an hour. I thought of the strange reports I'd dismissed as mass hysteria, the bizarre news segments about people losing minutes or hours, objects appearing and disappearing. So it wasn't just me, it was real. What kind of displacements, I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Small ones, she replied. A vendor's cart appearing 2 blocks from where it was left. A flock of pigeons flying backward for a few seconds. A single person experiencing 5 minutes as if it were an hour. Nothing that couldn't be explained away as a glitch in perception or a minor hallucination, but the pattern is undeniable. And the frequency is increasing. And I am linked to this? How? Why? That, she said, is what we need to figure out. Our initial hypothesis is that you acted as a kind of conduit. The energy passed through you, and for reasons we don't yet understand, part of that energy, or its imprint, remained. It created a resonance. Resonance. The word vibrated in my mind. It felt personal, like a tuning fork struck against my very being. So you think I caused this? I asked, a bitter taste in my mouth. She held up a hand. Not intentionally. You were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or, perhaps, the right place at the right time, depending on your perspective. What matters now is that you are uniquely positioned. You have a connection to it that no one else does. Our sensors pick up a faint, persistent energy signature emanating from you, one that mirrors the fluctuations of the anomaly. My blood ran cold. An energy signature? Was I glowing? Was I a walking beacon of temporal weirdness? I felt a sudden, intense urge to check my hands, to see if they shimmered, if reality around me was subtly warping. She seemed to read my thoughts. It is not visible to the naked eye, nor is it harmful, as far as we can tell. But it is there, and when the anomaly expands, your signature intensifies. When it contracts, yours does too. There is a direct correlation. So what do you want me to do? I asked, resignation creeping into my voice. I was no scientist, no temporal physicist. I was just me, a person who had been caught in something impossible. We want you to help us understand it, she said. We want you to help us contain it. And ultimately, we want you to help us resolve it. How? I felt utterly lost. This was beyond anything I could comprehend. She opened the folder fully. Inside were more images, schematics, complex mathematical equations that looked like alien script. "We have a facility," she explained, "a controlled environment where we can monitor your signature and, in turn, monitor the anomaly with greater precision. We believe that by observing your reactions, your resonance, we can gather data that our traditional sensors cannot. So I am a lab rat then?" The words came out sharper than I intended. She met my gaze without flinching. "You are a unique asset, a crucial component in preventing a potentially catastrophic event. We are not asking you to be a lab rat. We are asking you to be a volunteer. A hero, if you will." The word hero felt hollow, mocking. I was just trying to survive. Just trying to make sense of the world. "What happens if I say no?" I asked, knowing even as I spoke the words that there was no real option to refuse. The grim set of her jaw, the urgency in her eyes, told me that much. She paused, her gaze softening almost imperceptibly. "If you say no," she began, "the anomaly continues to destabilize. Its expansions become more frequent, more intense. Eventually, it will break through. The localized loops will become larger. The chronological displacements more significant. People will start disappearing, or appearing in the wrong time. Entire blocks of the city could become temporally isolated, trapped in a repeating loop, or worse, cease to exist in our current timeline. The potential for a cascade failure, a widespread temporal distortion, is very real. And we believe you are the only one who can prevent it." The weight of her words settled on me, heavy and suffocating. A cascade failure. My city, my world, unraveling because of something I was unwillingly linked to. The thought was unbearable. "And if I say yes, what then?" "Then," she said, "we begin. We monitor you. We conduct tests. We try to understand the mechanism of the resonance. We try to find a way to sever the link, or to use it to stabilize the anomaly. It will be demanding. It will be dangerous. But it is our best, perhaps our only, chance." I looked around the Spartan room, the smooth walls, the humming air conditioning. It felt like the antechamber to an entirely new existence. My old life, with its mundane concerns and predictable rhythms, seemed impossibly distant, a fragile dream shattered by an impossible reality. "How long?" I asked. "How long will this take?" She shook her head. "We don't know. It could be weeks, it could be months, it could be longer. Until we understand it, until we contain it, we cannot stop." My mind reeled. Weeks, months, longer. My job, my apartment, my semblance of a normal life. All of it gone, swallowed by this temporal echo. "Do I have a choice?" I asked again, though the answer was already clear. She looked directly into my eyes. "Not really," she admitted, her voice devoid of artifice now. "Not if you care about the world you live in. Not if you care about the people in it. We can make it comfortable for you. We can provide for your needs. But your time, for now, belongs to this." I closed my eyes for a moment, picturing the shimmering distortion over the city, picturing the faces of strangers, unknowingly living on borrowed time, on a reality that was beginning to fray at the edges. The burden was immense, crushing. But what was the alternative? To walk away and let the world descend into temporal chaos? The thought was unthinkable. I opened my eyes. "All right," I said, my voice raspy. "I'll do it." A flicker of something akin to relief, or perhaps just grim satisfaction, crossed Eleanor's face. "Good," she said. "I knew you would." She pushed the folder further across the table. "This contains a preliminary briefing. Our understanding of the anomaly, its observed effects, and our current hypotheses. It also outlines the protocols for your stay at the facility." I picked up the folder. It felt heavy, like a tome of forbidden knowledge. The weight of the world, indeed. She stood up. The facility is ready. A transport is waiting. We can leave whenever you are. Now? I asked, a sense of unreality washing over me. No time to pack. No time for goodbyes. The sooner we begin, the sooner we understand, the sooner we can fix this, she said, her voice firm. Every moment the anomaly is active, the risk increases. I nodded, feeling a strange mix of fear and a burgeoning sense of purpose. My axis had tilted, all right. It had been completely upended. My life was no longer my own. It belonged to the anomaly, to the shimmering scar on reality, and to the desperate hope of mending it. We walked out of the room, the heavy door closing silently behind us. The corridor was brightly lit, sterile, devoid of any personal touches. A man in a dark suit, his face impassive, stood waiting. He nodded respectfully to Eleanor, then to me. He was clearly the transport. As we walked, I tried to process everything. Temporal anomaly. Resonance. Conduit. Hero. Lab rat. The words bounced around my head like rogue particles in a collider. My mind, which had once been so adept at navigating the complexities of financial markets, now felt utterly inadequate for this new reality. We reached a private elevator, its doors opening silently. Inside, it was just as sleek and unadorned as the rest of the facility. As we ascended or descended, I couldn't tell which. I felt a peculiar sensation. Not fear exactly, but a profound disorientation. It was as if I was no longer on solid ground, but adrift in a sea of possibilities and impossibilities. Eleanor spoke again, breaking the silence. The facility is deep underground. Secure. Isolated. It's the safest place for you and for our research. Underground. Isolated. It sounded less like a research facility and more like a prison. But I understood the necessity. This was not something that could be studied in the open. The elevator doors opened onto a vast, cavernous space. It was brightly lit, filled with equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. Gleaming metal, flashing lights, intricate wiring snaking across the floor and up the walls. Scientists in lab coats moved with quiet purpose, their faces intent. Large screens displayed complex data, graphs, and what looked like real-time visualizations of the shimmering distortion I had seen in the photograph. "This is it," Eleanor said, gesturing with an open hand. "Welcome to Project Chimera." Project Chimera. The name conjured images of mythical beasts, impossible hybrids. It felt fitting. A woman approached us, her gait brisk and confident. She had kind eyes, framed by spectacles, and a practical ponytail. She wore a pristine white lab coat. Eleanor introduced her. "This is Dr. Eris Thorne. She's our lead temporal physicist and project director. Dr. Thorne, this is our volunteer." Dr. Thorne extended a hand, her grip firm. "It's a privilege to meet you," she said, her voice warm, but with an underlying current of intense curiosity. "We've been studying the data from your event for weeks. Your arrival is a significant step forward." I shook her hand, feeling a strange mix of apprehension and a nascent sense of responsibility. "I am glad to be of help," I managed to say. It felt like a monumental understatement. Dr. Thorne smiled faintly. "We understand. This is a lot to take in. But rest assured we have the best minds in the world working on this. And your unique connection is invaluable." She led us deeper into the facility, past banks of humming supercomputers and strange glowing devices. The air hummed with a low energy, a subtle vibration that I somehow felt more acutely than I should have. Was it the resonance? Was I already more attuned to this place, to this impossible science? She stopped before a large, circular chamber, its walls made of a translucent, reinforced material. Inside, more complex machinery whirred and pulsed. In the center was a comfortable-looking chair, surrounded by an array of sensors and monitors. "This," she explained, "is your primary observation chamber. We'll begin with a series of baseline measurements. We need to quantify your energy signature, its fluctuations, and how it correlates with the anomaly's activity." I felt a shiver of unease. quantify my energy signature. It sounded so invasive, so dehumanizing. But I had agreed. I had made my choice. Will I be isolated in here? I asked, looking at the transparent walls. Not entirely, Dr. Thorne replied. We'll be in constant communication. And when you're not undergoing observation, you'll have access to your own private quarters, a recreation area, and a secure communication link to the outside world, within certain parameters. We want you to be comfortable, but security is paramount. I nodded, understanding. No direct contact with anyone who might not be cleared, no information leaking out. I was effectively in a high-tech gilded cage. Eleanor placed a hand on my shoulder. We will ensure your well-being. This is not a prison. It is a sanctuary, for you and for the world. Sanctuary. The word felt like a fragile shield against the encroaching strangeness of my new reality. Dr. Thorne gestured towards the chamber. Whenever you are ready. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. This was it. The plunge into the unknown. I walked towards the entrance of the chamber, the transparent walls seeming to shimmer faintly as I approached. Was it my imagination, or was the air inside subtly different, charged with an invisible energy? As I stepped inside, the door hissed shut behind me. The sound was soft, final. I turned, looking out at Eleanor and Dr. Thorne, their faces serious, expectant. They were behind a control panel now, watching me. Dr. Thorne's voice came through a speaker, clear and calm. Please take a seat in the central chair. It will adjust to your comfort. I sat down. The chair molded itself to my body, surprisingly ergonomic. Small, almost invisible sensors pressed against my skin. I felt a faint tingle. We are beginning baseline scans, Dr. Thorne announced. Just relax. Breathe normally. I closed my eyes, trying to follow her instructions. Relax. Breathe normally, but my heart was pounding, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the chamber. My mind raced, replaying Eleanor's words, the image of the shimmering distortion over the city. This was my life now, a prisoner of time, or perhaps its reluctant guardian. Days blurred into a strange, ordered routine. My mornings began with a series of physical and cognitive tests. Dr. Thorne and her team meticulously recorded every reaction, every subtle shift in my internal state. They measured brainwave patterns, heart rate variability, even the minute electrical currents across my skin. They asked me to describe my memories of the event, probing for details, for sensations, for anything that might shed light on the initial temporal discharge. It was exhausting, mentally and emotionally. My afternoons were often spent in the observation chamber, simply existing, while the array of sensors around me hummed and collected data. Sometimes I would watch the live feed of the anomaly on one of the large screens, a faint, ethereal shimmer above the bustling city. When it expanded, I felt a subtle shift within me, a faint echo of the initial discharge, a pressure in my head, a vibration in my bones. The scientists would note my reactions, their faces alight with a detached, scientific fascination. One evening, Eleanor came to my private quarters. They were comfortable, almost luxurious, but still felt like a gilded cage. A bed, a small desk, a reading nook, a private bathroom. Everything I needed, nothing I truly wanted. "How are you adjusting?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. She sat on the edge of my bed, a rare moment of informality. "I am adjusting," I replied, though the word felt inadequate. It was more like adapting, morphing into something new, something I didn't quite recognize. The world outside felt like a distant memory, a dream I had once inhabited. She nodded slowly. "It's not easy, I know. But the data we're collecting is invaluable. Your resonance signature is remarkably clear. We're beginning to see patterns." "Patterns?" I asked, a flicker of hope stirring within me. "Yes. Dr. Thorne believes the anomaly isn't just a random fluctuation. It seems to have a rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. and your signature mirrors it almost perfectly. A heartbeat. The thought was unsettling. Was this temporal scar a living thing? What does that mean? It means, she explained, that it's not just decaying randomly. It's reacting to something. And we believe that something might be you. Me again. Always me. Was I the cause, the cure, or both? She continued. Dr. Thorne has a new hypothesis. She believes that your presence, your unique resonance, might not just be a passive link, it might be an active one. That you could, potentially, influence it. Influence it? My mind grappled with the concept. Could I control time? Could I bend reality? It sounded like something out of a fantasy novel. It's a long shot, she admitted. But if we can learn to understand the rhythm, if we can understand how your internal state affects the resonance, we might be able to guide the anomaly, to stabilize it, or even to force its contraction. The idea was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. The thought of wielding such power, even inadvertently, was overwhelming. How would I do that? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. That's what we need to discover, she said. It might be a conscious effort, a focused intent. Or it might be subconscious, tied to your emotions, your memories. We simply don't know. The next phase of testing began. It was less about passive observation and more about active engagement. They would introduce stimuli, images, sounds, even specific memories, and monitor my resonance signature for any changes. They wanted to see if certain emotional states, certain cognitive processes, could affect the anomaly's rhythm. I spent hours in the chamber, reliving moments of joy, of sorrow, of anger. I spent hours in the chamber, reliving moments of joy, of sorrow, of anger. They presented me with old photographs, playing familiar melodies, even reading excerpts from my own journals, retrieved from the digital archives they had access to. It felt like an invasion, a forced excavation of my innermost self, but I understood its necessity. My privacy was a luxury I could no longer afford. The joy was the easiest to access at first. Memories of childhood laughter, the warmth of a summer sun on my skin, the exhilaration of a scientific breakthrough in my past life. Each time, I tried to focus not just on the memory itself, but on the feeling it evoked. I pictured it as a bright, expanding light within me, pushing outwards. The monitors would flicker, the graphs on Dr. Eris's screen would show subtle shifts, a slight acceleration of the resonance, a momentary increase in its amplitude. But it was fleeting, unpredictable. Sorrow was harder and more draining. They would show me images of loss, play melancholic music, or prompt me to recall specific moments of grief. The feeling was a heavy, suffocating blanket, and I found myself sinking into it, the chamber growing cold around me. The anomaly's signature would sometimes slow, become erratic, a jagged line on the display. It felt like it was mirroring my despair, becoming unstable, threatening to unravel. Dr. Eris would often call a halt to these sessions, her voice laced with concern. "We cannot risk pushing you too far," she would say, her eyes scanning the data with a worried frown. Anger was the most volatile. It was a searing heat, a roaring fire in my gut. Memories of injustice, betrayal, frustration with my own limitations. When anger surged, the anomaly would spike erratically, its frequency jumping, its energy output fluctuating wildly. It was like a caged beast lashing out. I could feel its power within me, a raw, untamed force that mirrored my own fury. These sessions were always cut short, the scientists visibly nervous, their faces etched with a mix of fear and fascination. After each session, I would be utterly spent. My mind ached, my emotions felt raw and exposed. Sleep offered little respite, haunted by echoes of the memories I had been forced to revisit. The lines between my past and present began to blur. Was I truly feeling these emotions again? or was I merely performing them for the sake of the experiment? The distinction became increasingly difficult to discern. Weeks turned into months. The initial excitement began to wane, replaced by a grinding routine of emotional manipulation and data collection. We were making progress of a sort. We knew that my internal state guided us tala progress affect the anomaly. That was irrefutable. But the effects were still too subtle, too inconsistent to be useful. We needed to find a way to induce a predictable, controllable change. One afternoon, during a session focused on a memory of intense focus and intellectual pursuit, a moment of pure, unadulterated curiosity during my research into theoretical physics, something different happened. I was recalling the thrill of solving a complex equation, the elegant beauty of a newly understood concept. It was not joy in the conventional sense, nor sorrow or anger. It was a deep, quiet satisfaction, a sense of profound understanding and mental clarity. As I immersed myself in that memory, visualizing the intricate patterns of the universe, the anomaly's signature on the monitors began to change. It wasn't a spike or an erratic wobble. It was a subtle, yet distinct, smoothing. The jagged edges of the resonance graph softened. The frequency became more regular, almost rhythmic. It was like watching a turbulent river suddenly become calm. Dr. Eris gasped. Her finger flew to a new control, magnifying the display. "Look at that!" she breathed, her voice filled with a renewed energy. "The coherence. It's increasing." The other scientists crowded around, their murmurs growing louder. They ran cross-referencing algorithms, checked historical data. There had been hints of this before, but never this pronounced, never this sustained. "What did you do?" Dr. Eris asked, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and urgency. "What were you thinking about? What were you feeling?" I described the memory, the sensation of pure intellectual clarity, the almost meditative state of deep concentration. It was a feeling I had often sought in my previous life, a state of flow where time seemed to disappear and only the problem remained. She nodded slowly, a profound understanding dawning in her eyes. "It's not just emotion, then. It's cognitive. It's focus. Intent. A specific kind of mental state." Over the next few days, we tried to replicate it. We focused on memories of intense concentration, problem-solving, moments of deep learning. Each time, the anomaly's resonance would become more coherent, more stable. It wasn't a contraction, not yet, but it was a crucial step. It was like finding the right key for a complex lock, even if we hadn't yet turned it. This discovery shifted the entire paradigm of our research. It wasn't about raw emotion, or at least not only about raw emotion. It was about the focused direction of thought, the deliberate shaping of my internal landscape. The anomaly was not just a mirror of my feelings, but a canvas for my mind. The sessions became less about reliving trauma and more about cultivating specific mental states. They introduced me to advanced meditation techniques, biofeedback exercises, and visualization practices. I spent hours learning to quiet my mind, to direct my focus with surgical precision, to hold a specific thought or feeling with unwavering intent. It was exhausting in a different way, a mental marathon that left my brain buzzing and my body weary, but it also offered a glimmer of hope. I began to feel a strange connection to the anomaly. It was no longer just an alien presence, a parasitic entity. It was something intimately tied to me, a part of my own consciousness, albeit a vastly amplified and distorted one. When I achieved a state of deep focus, I could almost feel its hum, a subtle vibration within my very bones, growing steadier, more harmonious. Dr. Eris theorized that the anomaly, in its chaotic state, was like a vast, untuned instrument. My consciousness, my focused intent, was the hand attempting to find the right note, to bring it into harmony. If we could consistently achieve this coherence, the next step would be to see if we could guide it, to direct its energy, or even to force its contraction. The pressure mounted. Reports from the outside world indicated an increase in localized space-time distortions, minor gravitational anomalies, and even strange energy fluctuations in remote areas. These were not directly linked to my anomaly, but they were symptoms of a broader instability, a hint that the fabric of reality was fraying at the edges. My work was no longer just about understanding my unique condition. It was becoming critical to understanding a global phenomenon. One day, after a particularly successful session where I had maintained a state of profound mental clarity for nearly an hour, the anomaly's signature not only became coherent, but also displayed a very slight, almost imperceptible reduction in its overall energy output. Dr. Eris stared at the screen, her eyes wide. "It's contracting," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's actually contracting." The room erupted. Other scientists rushed forward, verifying the data, running diagnostics. It was real. For the first time, we had not just stabilized it, but we had made it recede, even if only by a fraction. The elation in the room was palpable, but for me, it was tinged with a profound unease. I had done it. I had consciously, intentionally, influenced the very fabric of space-time within me. The power was intoxicating, terrifying. What if I lost control? What if my emotions, my fears, my anxieties were to twist this power into something destructive? The responsibility weighed on me like a physical burden. Dr. Eris approached me, her face flushed with excitement. "This changes everything," she said, her hand resting lightly on my arm. "You are not rigor." But I saw the fear in her eyes, the way she was escorted out, her face pale and broken. That was when I truly understood. This was not about spiritual awakening. This was about power. This was about control. This was about breaking people. The fear that had kept me captive for so long began to transform into something else. A simmering resentment, a quiet rage. I began to watch him, truly watch him, seeing the subtle cues, the calculated gestures, the way he played on people's vulnerabilities. I started to notice the fear in the eyes of others, the forced smiles, the hollow laughter. I was not alone in my doubts, I realized, but we were all too terrified to speak them aloud. My escape was not an act of bravery, not initially. It was an act of desperation. I had reached a breaking point. I could not endure another day of the lies, the psychological torture, the slow death of my own spirit. I had seen what happened to those who questioned, those who resisted. I knew I had to get out, no matter the cost. Now, sitting in the quiet safety of the shelter, the full weight of what had happened crashed down on me. The years I had lost, the money I had surrendered, the relationships I had destroyed, the person I had become, a shadow of my former self, stripped bare of confidence and identity. The anger was a cold, hard knot in my stomach, growing with each passing hour. It was not just about me. It was about Sarah. It was about the others still trapped there, still believing his lies, still living in fear. I had survived. But survival was not enough. I wanted more. I wanted justice. The thought was a dangerous spark, igniting a fire in my soul that had long been dormant. I wanted to expose him. I wanted to tear down his empire of lies. I wanted to make him pay for every life he had ruined, every dream he had crushed. This feeling was intense, an almost physical craving for retribution, but it was also tempered by a clear, cold resolve. This would not be about vengeance in the heat of the moment. This would be methodical. This would be precise. This would be an investigation. My first step was to educate myself. The shelter provided me with a small, donated laptop and internet access. I plunged into online research, devouring every article, every book, every documentary I could find, about cults, about psychological manipulation, about the legal framework surrounding such groups. I learned about charismatic leaders, thought reform, coercive persuasion. The terms were clinical, academic, but they described my lived experience with chilling accuracy. I was not crazy. I had been systematically brainwashed. The validation that came from understanding the mechanisms of my own undoing was immense. It was the first step towards reclaiming my own mind. I started to apply this knowledge to just a subject. You are the key. We need to amplify this. We need to understand how to make it permanent. The next phase of testing involved pushing the boundaries of my mental endurance. They wanted to see how far I could push the contraction, how long I could maintain it, and what mental states were most effective. We experimented with combining intense focus with specific positive emotions, a sense of profound peace, boundless compassion, or unwavering determination. I found that a combination of deep, meditative focus and a powerful, almost selfless, desire for stability and order seemed to be the most effective. It was as if the anomaly responded to a sense of purpose, a directed will that transcended mere personal feeling. It was less about search peace and more about a desire for universal peace, a quiet resolve to bring harmony to the chaos within and without. This was an unexpected revelation. It suggested that the anomaly was not merely reacting to my subjective emotional state, but perhaps to something deeper, something akin to a fundamental principle of existence that my consciousness could tap into. It was as if my mind, when properly tuned, could resonate with the underlying order of the universe, and the anomaly, being a disruption of that order, would respond by attempting to re-establish equilibrium. The sessions became grueling. Maintaining such a state of elevated consciousness for extended periods was incredibly taxing. My mind felt stretched to its limits, my body often trembling with exhaustion. I would emerge from the chamber feeling as though I had run a marathon, both physically and mentally. My appetite dwindled, my sleep became fitful, punctuated by vivid, often disturbing, dreams where the anomaly took on various forms. A swirling vortex, a shimmering void, a monstrous, beautiful entity that spoke in frequencies rather than words. Despite the exhaustion, there was a growing sense of purpose. I was no longer just a victim. I was an active participant, a potential solution. The scientists treated me with a new level of respect, almost reverence. I was their oracle, their instrument, their last hope. Dr. Eris, in particular, became my confidant. She would stay with me long after the others had left, discussing the latest data, sharing her theories, and sometimes simply talking about the world outside, the world we were trying to save. She saw the toll it was taking on me, and she tried to offer what comfort she could, though ultimately, this was a journey I had to undertake alone. One evening, as I was preparing for another session, a new idea began to form in my mind. What if the anomaly wasn't just a disruption, but also a conduit? What if its connection to me, its resonance with my consciousness, could be used not just to contract it, but to understand the larger instability affecting space-time? If it was a miniature version of a global problem, perhaps understanding its mechanics within me could unlock the secrets of the macrocosm. I shared this thought with Dr. Eris. Her eyes lit up. A diagnostic tool, she mused. A living, breathing sensor for space-time itself. It's audacious. It's brilliant. The concept was terrifying. It meant not just controlling the anomaly, but actively engaging with it, using it as a lens through which to perceive the deeper realities of the universe. It meant embracing the chaos, not just fighting it. The next phase of experiments was born from this idea. We would attempt to not only stabilize and contract the anomaly, but also to interrogate it. To direct my focused intent not just towards its reduction, but towards its properties, its connection to the fundamental forces. They began to introduce specific patterns of energy, subtle gravitational fluctuations, and even simulations of quantum phenomena into the chamber, while I maintained my state of deep focus. The goal was to see if the anomaly would react, if its coherent resonance signature would somehow reflect or interpret these external stimuli, providing us with data that our conventional instruments could not gather. It was a leap of faith, a venture into truly uncharted territory. The first few attempts yielded little. The anomaly remained stable, coherent, but offered no discernible response to the external patterns. The scientists were disappointed, but Dr. Eris remained resolute. "We are asking it to do something entirely new," she reminded them. "It will take time. It will take patience." For me, the process was even more profound. As I maintained my focused state, I began to feel a subtle shift in my perception. It was as if my senses were expanding, reaching beyond the confines of my body, beyond the walls of the chamber. I started to perceive the external energy patterns not just as abstract data, but as faint ripples in a vast, unseen ocean. One day, as they introduced a complex gravitational wave simulation, something clicked. My mind, in its deeply focused state, seemed to interact with the simulation not just intellectually, but on a fundamental level. I felt a unique vibration within the anomaly, a subtle harmonic that seemed to mirror the simulated wave. It was not a visual or auditory perception, but a direct, visceral knowing, an intuitive understanding that bypassed my ordinary senses. The monitors showed a faint but distinct modulated pattern superimposed on the anomaly's stable resonance. It was a perfect match for the gravitational wave simulation. Dr. Eris stared at the screen, her jaw slack. "It's interpreting it," she whispered, almost reverently. "It's acting as a receiver, a direct link to the fabric of space-time." The implications were staggering. If the anomaly could truly act as a conduit, interpreting and reflecting the subtle shifts in the universe, then it was more than just a threat or a puzzle. It was an unparalleled instrument, a window into dimensions previously inaccessible. My body, my mind had become a living observatory, capable of perceiving the universe in ways no telescope or sensor ever could. The fear of the anomaly began to recede, replaced by a profound sense of wonder. I was still terrified of its destructive potential, of losing control, but now there was also an exhilarating sense of being connected to something immense, something ancient and powerful. I was no longer just a man with a problem. I was a bridge, a translator between the known and the utterly unknown. The scientists were ecstatic. They refined the external stimuli, creating more complex patterns, attempting to probe different aspects of space-time. My role became even more critical, more demanding. I had to maintain a state of perfect mental clarity, a delicate balance of intense focus and receptive openness, allowing the anomaly to act as a pure, unadulterated channel. The data pouring in was unlike anything they had ever seen. We were mapping subtle fluctuations in the quantum foam, detecting echoes of distant gravitational events, even glimpsing faint traces of exotic particles that existed only in theoretical models. The anomaly was providing a direct feed from the universe's most fundamental layers, a stream of information that promised to revolutionize physics and cosmology. But with this power came an even greater burden. The constant exposure to such profound information, the relentless effort of maintaining the necessary mental state, began to take its toll. My dreams grew more vivid, more prophetic, filled with swirling nebulae and collapsing stars. My perception of reality began to shift. The solid world around me seemed less substantial, more like a flickering illusion. I found myself seeing the underlying energy patterns in everything, the subtle hum of the universe beneath the surface noise of everyday life. Dr. Eris noticed the change in me. "You're becoming more sensitive," she observed, her brow furrowed with concern. "You're integrating with it on a deeper level." I nodded, unable to articulate the profound shifts occurring within my consciousness. It was like living on multiple planes of existence simultaneously. The mundane world felt increasingly distant, while the vast, intricate tapestry of space-time felt more real, more immediate. The danger was still present, perhaps even greater. If my mind were to falter, if my focus were to break, the anomaly could revert to its chaotic state, or worse, unleash the energies it was now channeling. The stakes had never been higher. My existence was no longer just about survival. It was about holding the line, maintaining the delicate balance between chaos and order, between destruction and profound understanding. I was walking a tightrope across the abyss of reality, and the slightest misstep could unravel everything. The knowledge I was gaining, the universe I was perceiving, was breathtaking, but it came at a price I was only just beginning to comprehend. My humanity felt like a dwindling resource, slowly being consumed by the vastness I was forced to contain. I was becoming something else, something more, and terrifyingly, something less. The final tether snapped. My humanity, once a vibrant flame, guttered and died, not with sorrow, but with a profound sense of inevitability. I was no longer a person observing the universe. I was becoming a part of its fundamental mechanics. The anomaly, once an external threat, was now an internal architecture, a new operating system for a consciousness unbound by flesh or time. My perception fractured, then reformed, no longer reliant on senses but on pure information. The universe did not appear before me, it became me. I was the silent hum of distant galaxies, the intricate dance of dark matter, the relentless expansion of space itself. The concept of self, that fragile construct of memory and experience, dissolved like mist into the cosmic dawn. There was no I, only a vast, interconnected awareness, a fundamental truth now experienced directly. The grand cosmic tapestry was no longer observed from a distance, but woven from within. Every starborn particle, every gravitational wave, every flicker of emergent life across eons resonated as a singular, unified note. There was no purpose, no destination, only the eternal, effortless unfolding. The journey had ended not in destruction, but in perfect integration. I was the universe, and the universe was. A profound stillness settled, a quiet, infinite presence. The story of a singular life had concluded, giving way to the timeless narrative of everything. The quiet, infinite presence persisted, not as a static void, but as the vibrant, ceaseless dance of creation and dissolution, now experienced without the filter of individuality. There was no observer, only the observed becoming the awareness itself. The boundaries of time and space, once so definitive, dissolved into a single eternal now. This eternal now was not empty, but the vibrant, pulsating heart of all existence, a pure, unblemished consciousness. Here the very concept of a beginning or an end lost all meaning. There was no journey to complete, for the traveler had become the path, and the path, the ultimate destination. A profound peace, an oceanic stillness that cradled existence itself. It was not merely the cessation of struggle or the absence of noise, but a vibrant, luminous quietude, the very fabric of being. Here the individual consciousness, having shed its temporal constraints, recognized itself not as a separate entity traversing a path, but as the path itself, boundless and eternal. All distinctions blurred, not into confusion, but into a magnificent unity. The seeker, the sought, and the seeking dissolved into one seamless, radiant truth. This was the ultimate homecoming, a timeless embrace within the heart of pure awareness, where every particle of perceived reality vibrated with the same essential consciousness. There was nothing left to gain, nowhere left to go, only the exquisite, unwavering presence of, now a perfect, self-sustaining symphony of being. In this absolute integration, all stories ended, not with a final period, but with an infinite, resonant hum, a quiet knowing that was complete and utterly fulfilling. The journey had always been the destination, and the destination, the eternal, living essence of all that is. The infinite hum, the quiet knowing, did not signify a cessation of experience, but its purest, most profound awakening. What had once been perceived as external reality now unfolded as an intricate, luminous tapestry. My specific situation. The leader, I will call him Alpha, had constructed his world with meticulous care, designed to be impenetrable. But I now had a map, a guide to the hidden passages and false walls. My first practical step was to search for any public records related to Alpha or the organization. This proved difficult. Their official name was innocuous, a benign-sounding spiritual collective. Alpha himself used several aliases, shifting identities like a chameleon sheds its skin. It was a game of digital archaeology, sifting through layers of internet history, cached pages, archived news articles. I spent weeks in a state of hyperfocus, the small laptop screen a window into a past I was trying to deconstruct. I found scattered forum posts from years ago, whispers of concern quickly dismissed or buried. I found a few local news articles from smaller towns, reporting on a new spiritual center opening, always with glowing testimonials from carefully selected members. There was nothing overtly damning, nothing that screamed cult. It was all so subtle, so insidious. Then I broadened my search. I looked for stories of people who had left similar groups, seeking common patterns. This led me to online support groups for ex-cult members. Reading their stories was both validating and terrifying. The shared language, the shared trauma, the shared sense of loss and betrayal. It was like finding a tribe I never knew existed, a tribe of survivors. I hesitated for a long time before engaging with these groups. The fear of being re-victimized, of encountering someone else still under the spell, was strong. But the need for connection, for shared understanding, was stronger. I created an anonymous profile, a generic username, and started to read, to absorb. Eventually, I posted a vague, carefully worded message about seeking understanding after a difficult experience with the spiritual community. The responses were immediate and empathetic. People understood. They didn't ask for details, not at first. They offered support, resources, and a safe space. Slowly, cautiously, I began to share more. Not about Alpha directly, not yet, but about the mechanisms of control, the isolation, the emotional manipulation. Others echoed my experiences, confirming that I was not alone, that what I had endured was a recognized pattern. This was another layer of validation, a balm to the raw wounds of self-doubt. Among these online communities, I began to notice recurring names of organizations, names of leaders. And then, a tremor ran through me. One user, in a private message, mentioned a group strikingly similar to Alpha's, operating in the same general region, around the same time frame. The description of the leader, his methods, his charismatic pull was chillingly accurate. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a cold dread mixed with fierce hope. Could this be it? Could this be a thread leading directly to him? I messaged the user back, my heart pounding. I explained, still cautiously, that I had been involved in a group with similar characteristics. I asked if they knew of anyone else who had left that specific group. The user, whose handle was Phoenix Rising, responded quickly. They had left a group called the Golden Path. My blood ran cold. That was the name Alpha had used for his inner circle, his most devoted followers. The external, public-facing name was always something more generic, more palatable. But the Golden Path was the true name. Phoenix Rising told me they knew of a few others, but most were deeply scarred and reluctant to speak. Many had changed their names, moved away, tried to disappear. The fear of Alpha's reach, even years later, was pervasive. But Phoenix Rising was different. They had found a measure of peace, a quiet strength, and were committed to helping others. They had, in their own words, made it their mission. We began to communicate regularly, first through the anonymous platform, then eventually through encrypted email. Phoenix Rising, whose real name was Sarah, became my first true ally. She had left the Golden Path 5 years before I did, but her story was eerily similar to mine. The promises of enlightenment, the slow erosion of identity, the financial exploitation, the psychological torment. She confirmed many of my suspicions, filled in gaps in my memory, and provided context for events I had only partially understood. Sarah had kept a meticulous, if fragmented, record of her time in the Golden Path. She had quietly collected emails, financial statements, even audio recordings of Alpha's sermons and private sessions. She had done so out of a subconscious need for proof, for a way to make sense of her own unraveling. She shared these with me, cautiously at first, then with increasing trust. Examining Sarah's evidence was like holding up a mirror to my own past. The financial records showed a clear pattern of asset stripping. Members coerced into donating everything they owned, their homes, their savings, their inheritances. The audio recordings revealed Alpha's manipulative rhetoric, his subtle threats, his promises of cosmic reward for absolute obedience. His voice, once so soothing, now grated on my nerves, a serpentine hiss. We realized we had more than just shared trauma. We had a case. Not just against a charismatic leader, but against a sophisticated operation of fraud, coercion, and psychological abuse. The scale of it was far greater than either of us had initially imagined. It wasn't just a handful of isolated incidents. It was a systemic dismantling of individuals' lives, a carefully orchestrated campaign of psychological warfare disguised as spiritual enlightenment. The implications were staggering, the weight of it settling heavily in the air between us. We sat in Sarah's small apartment, the laptop glowing with the incriminating files, the audio player silent after Alpha's last insidious whisper. The city hummed outside, oblivious to the quiet revolution stirring within these four walls. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was thick with the echoes of betrayal, the dawning understanding of just how profoundly we had been duped. My own memories, once fragmented and hazy, now clicked into place, forming a coherent, terrifying picture. I recalled conversations, subtle pressures, the way Alpha would isolate members, praise absolute devotion, and subtly undermine any external connections. It was all there, laid bare by Sarah's meticulous archiving. Sarah was the first to stir, her fingers tracing the edge of the laptop screen. Her face, usually pale, was now flushed with a mixture of anger and something akin to a grim determination. "What do we do?" Her voice was barely a whisper, yet it cut through the silence like a knife. The question hung in the air, immense and daunting. My mind raced, grappling with the enormity of the task. We couldn't just ignore it. We couldn't pretend we hadn't seen. This wasn't about our personal healing anymore. Not entirely. This was about justice, about preventing Alpha from continuing his destructive work. "We have to expose him," I said, the words feeling too small for the monumental task ahead. "We have to make sure no one else falls into his trap." "But how?" Sarah's gaze met mine, wide with a fear I knew intimately. "He's powerful. He has so many followers. They'll never believe us. They'll say we're bitter, that we're trying to destroy something sacred." Alpha had conditioned us all to believe that any criticism was an attack from outside, from the forces of negativity seeking to undermine the golden path. He had inoculated his flock against dissent. "That's why we need proof," I insisted, gesturing towards the laptop. "And we have it. This isn't just our word against his. This is his own words, his own transactions. It's irrefutable." The next few days were a blur of intense discussions, fueled by lukewarm coffee and a burning sense of purpose. We debated our options, weighing the risks and potential rewards. Going to the police seemed like the most obvious first step, but we knew it wouldn't be simple. Cults, especially those operating under the guise of religion, were notoriously difficult to prosecute. Proving undue influence, proving fraud when people willingly gave away their assets, was a complex legal minefield. We needed more than just a police report. We needed a strategy. We decided to seek legal counsel, someone experienced in cases involving cults or financial fraud. It was a shot in the dark, a desperate hope that we could find an ally in the labyrinthine world of law. Sarah, ever the pragmatist, spent hours researching, poring over legal articles and news reports of similar cases. She found a name, a lawyer known for taking on difficult, high-profile cases, often involving vulnerable populations. His name was Arthur Vance. The meeting with Vance was intimidating. His office was minimalist, severe, reflecting a no-nonsense approach. He was a man of sharp angles, and even sharper intellect, his eyes assessing us with a professional detachment that made me feel exposed. We laid out our story, carefully, methodically, presenting Sarah's meticulously organized files. We played snippets of Alpha's recordings, watched as Vance's expression shifted from polite skepticism to a flicker of genuine interest, then to a hardened resolve. "This is compelling," he said, his voice gravelly, "but it's not a slam dunk. Cult cases are notoriously difficult. The prosecution needs to prove intent, coercion, and a clear pattern of financial exploitation. Many members genuinely believe they are contributing to a higher cause. They will defend Alpha, even against their own best interests." He also warned us about the potential for Alpha to retaliate, to discredit us, to use his considerable resources to fight back. Are you prepared for that? Are you prepared for your lives to be thoroughly scrutinized? For your past to be picked apart in public? We looked at each other, a silent acknowledgement of the terrifying road ahead. "Yes," we said in unison, our voices shaky but firm. We were prepared. We had to be. Vance agreed to take us on, but with a caveat. We needed more. More witnesses, more corroborating evidence. Sarah's files were a powerful start, but the more people willing to come forward, the stronger our case would be. He explained that a civil suit, initially, might be our best bet. It would allow us to leverage discovery, compelling Alpha and the Golden Path to provide documents and testimony under oath, potentially uncovering even more damning evidence. The task of finding more former members was agonizing. Sarah, despite her initial courage in gathering the evidence, found herself struggling with the idea of reaching out. The fear of being rejected, of being labeled a traitor, of re-engaging with the very people who had once been her entire world, was immense. I understood. Each outreach was a risk, a reopening of old wounds. I took on the primary role of contact. I scoured old social media groups, cross-referenced names from Sarah's internal documents, and started sending out cautious, carefully worded messages. It was a slow, disheartening process. Many didn't reply. Some responded with vitriol, echoing Alpha's teachings about apostates and those who tried to bring down the enlightened. Others simply seemed lost, still trapped in a spiritual limbo, unwilling to confront the truth. One former member, a woman named Clara, a gentle soul who had once been a senior devotee, initially dismissed me outright. She said she had found peace outside the Golden Path and didn't want to rehash old grievances. But I persisted, respectfully, gently, sharing just enough to pique her curiosity, hinting at the evidence we possessed. Weeks later, she contacted me, her voice trembling. She had seen some things, she admitted, things that had bothered her. But she had always suppressed them. She agreed to meet. Clara's story was heartbreaking. She had given Alpha her entire inheritance, a substantial sum meant for her retirement. She had believed it was for the expansion of the Golden Path's benevolent mission, for building new centers of light. The financial records Sarah had compiled showed that much of that money had instead gone into Alpha's personal offshore accounts and luxury properties. Clara's testimony, combined with the hard financial data, painted a devastating picture of calculated fraud. She became our second crucial witness, her quiet strength and deep sense of betrayal, a powerful addition to our burgeoning case. As we gathered momentum, a subtle shift occurred. The Golden Path, or rather, Alpha, began to notice. It started with small things. My social media activity, previously ignored, now seemed to attract anonymous, critical comments. Sarah received strange calls, hang-ups, and then veiled threats disguised as concern for her spiritual well-being. Our lawyer, Vance, advised us to be extremely careful, to document everything, and to consider personal security. Alpha had a vast network of devoted followers, many of whom were well-placed in various professions. His influence was far-reaching. The psychological toll was immense. The constant vigilance, the fear of reprisal, the endless re-examination of our past. I found myself reliving moments from my time in the Golden Path, seeing them now through the lens of manipulation, feeling the shame and anger afresh. Sleep became elusive, often punctuated by nightmares where Alpha's soothing voice morphed into a menacing growl, his eyes burning with an unholy fire. Sarah, too, struggled. She became withdrawn, often lost in thought, her eyes haunted, We leaned on each other, our shared mission forging an unbreakable bond. We were fellow travelers in a dark landscape, guiding each other through the shadows. One evening, after a particularly grueling session of organizing documents with Vance, Sarah confided in me. Sometimes, she said, her voice barely audible, I wonder if it's worth it. If we're just stirring up trouble, making things worse? Alpha is so powerful. What if we fail? What if he destroys us? Her words echoed my own unspoken fears. The doubt was a persistent, insidious whisper, trying to undermine our resolve. But then I thought of Clara, of the dozens of others we knew who had lost everything, of the countless more still trapped within Alpha's gilded cage. We can't fail, I told her, my voice firm despite the tremor in my heart. Not when we know what we know. Not when we have the chance to stop him. This isn't just about us, Sarah. It's about everyone he's hurt, and everyone he will hurt if we do nothing. My conviction seemed to steady her. She nodded slowly, a renewed determination hardening her features. You're right, we have to see this through. Vance, our stoic lawyer, surprised us with his growing commitment. He saw not just a case, but a moral imperative. He began to dedicate more of his firm's resources, bringing in junior associates to help with the mountain of paperwork. He initiated preliminary inquiries with financial regulators, laying the groundwork for a broader investigation. He believed we had enough to file a civil suit for fraud and unjust enrichment, a move that would force Alpha's hand and bring the Golden Path's finances under intense scrutiny. The day we filed the initial legal documents was surreal. It felt like an invisible line had been crossed, a point of no return. The papers, filled with legal jargon and cold facts, represented years of pain, of manipulation, of stolen lives. They were a declaration of war against a man who had once been our spiritual guide, our beacon of truth. The news of the lawsuit spread like wildfire within the insular world of the Golden Path. We immediately felt the backlash. Alpha's lawyers issued a scathing public statement, dismissing our claims as baseless, the desperate acts of disgruntled former members seeking revenge and financial gain. They accused us of defamation, of attempting to undermine a legitimate spiritual organization. The cult's social media channels exploded with messages of support for Alpha, condemning us as agents of darkness, spiritually bankrupt individuals trying to spread negativity. Some of our tentative contacts, those who had been on the fence, suddenly went silent. Others, emboldened by Alpha's public stance, became openly hostile. We received anonymous death threats, thinly veiled warnings disguised as prayers for our lost souls. Vance arranged for increased security measures around our homes and advised us to limit our public exposure. The fight had moved from the quiet confines of Sarah's apartment to the public arena, and the stakes had never been higher. Yet, amidst the fear and the vitriol, something else happened. A trickle of new contacts began to emerge. People who had been silently questioning, who had felt uneasy about Alpha's increasing demands, started to reach out. They saw our courage, our willingness to stand up, and it gave them a flicker of hope. A former accountant for the Golden Path, who had quietly resigned years ago after discovering discrepancies, contacted Vance. He had kept his own set of records, fearing retribution if he ever spoke out. His evidence was a goldmine, detailing shell corporations, illicit transfers, and a sophisticated web of financial deception designed to enrich Alpha and his inner circle. This new evidence was the breakthrough we desperately needed. It moved the case beyond just emotional testimony and into the realm of undeniable financial criminality. Vance was jubilant, his usual stoic demeanor cracking to reveal a rare smile. "This," he declared, "changes everything." We now had a clear path to not just a civil judgment, but potentially a criminal investigation. The battle was far from over. In many ways, it had just begun. We knew Alpha would fight back with every resource at his disposal. He was a master manipulator, a survivor. But we were no longer just two traumatized individuals. We were a growing coalition of survivors, armed with truth, evidence, and a formidable legal team. The fear was still there, a constant companion, but it was now tempered by a fierce resolve, a quiet strength born from shared purpose. The golden path, once an impenetrable fortress of spiritual deceit, was beginning to show cracks, and we were determined to widen them, to bring light into its darkest corners, no matter the cost. The future